Three places in Australia still sit on the edge of what science can explain. A mountain near Cooktown that is closed because people can vanish into spaces no rescuer can safely enter. A light near Boulia that has followed travelers since at least the 1890s. And a desert crater whose traditional story describes a falling star with disturbing physical accuracy. By the end of this, you will know why none of these places need a cheap supernatural answer to feel dangerous, and why the official explanations still leave something behind. This is Australia's most unexplained places seen through deep time, Black Mountain, the Min Min Light, and Wolfe Creek's occupation-era mysteries. It is older than that. Stone, air, memory, impact, the kind of forces that do not care whether a human being understands them before stepping too close. Start in the north, where the road country around Cooktown carries heat in the bitumen and the bush presses in close on both sides. From a distance, Black Mountain, or Kalkajaka, does not look like a normal mountain. It rises dark and broken, a huge pile of granite boulders stacked over one another as if the earth cracked open and left its bones exposed. There are no soft green slopes inviting you upward, no friendly walking line, no clear summit path. Just rock on rock on rock, with blackened surfaces catching the light and throwing it back dull like burnt charcoal. But the color is the least important part. The real danger is underneath. Kalkajaka is a boulder labyrinth. Those granite blocks are not a single solid wall. They are balanced, jammed, wedged together by weight and chance, leaving narrow cracks, hidden drops, and deep empty chambers between them. From above, a gap can look like a shadow. From one step away, it can become a fall. The problem is reaching them without shifting the stone around them. That is why climbers are kept out, because rescue itself can become impossible. That one fact matters, because it changes the whole story. It can do it mechanically. Quietly, a boot slips on sun-warmed granite. A hand grabs at a surface made slick by age and growth. A stone knocks loose somewhere below, and the sound travels strangely through the gaps, dull and delayed, like it came from inside the mountain rather than from under your feet. Then the bush goes still again. Long before modern warning signs, though, Kalkajaka already had a boundary around it in another language of knowledge. The traditional owners did not need a park notice to understand that this was not ordinary ground. Oral tradition held the place as dangerous, significant, and not to be entered casually. That does not mean those stories should be reduced to safety tips, as if their only value is whether they match modern risk assessment. They carry lore, memory, and meaning. But listen carefully, and you hear something powerful. The cultural warning and the physical landscape point in the same direction. Stay back. Respect the place. Do not treat it like an ordinary hill. Now move far inland, away from the wet north and into the open channel country near Boulia, where distance becomes its own kind of pressure. At night out there, headlights seem to float for a long time before they arrive. The horizon is low. The sky feels too large. Sound drops away until the engine, the tires, and your own breathing become the whole world. That is where people have reported the Min Min Light since at least the 1890s. The accounts vary, as old witness accounts always do, but the core detail keeps returning. A strange light appears where no clear source should be, keeps pace with a traveler, and then vanishes. Sometimes it is described as white or yellow, sometimes as a glow low over the ground, sometimes as something that seems to retreat when approached. The eerie reading is obvious. A light that follows you sounds alive. But the best scientific answer is stranger than a simple dismissal. In 2003, University of Queensland professor Jack Pettigrew proposed that the Min Min Light may be a Fata Morgana, caused by a temperature inversion. In plain language, Layers of air at different temperatures can bend light across long distances. A campfire, a vehicle headlight, or another source far beyond where you think the horizon ends can appear lifted, smeared, or displaced. Hovering where nothing physical is actually sitting, the atmosphere becomes a lens. The empty road gains a false companion. That explanation is serious. It explains a lot. It fits the flat country, the long sight lines, the cold and warm air layering after dark, and the blurred, floating quality many witnesses describe. But it does not neatly explain every report, especially the feeling that the light responds to movement, pacing a vehicle, and then disappearing just when the witness expects to close the distance. A mirage can bend light. Can it seem to hunt? That is where the Min remains uncomfortable. And then there is the third place, far to the west, where the mystery is a scar in the earth. Wolfe Creek Crater is about 875 to 950 meters wide. It was made when a 14,000-ton iron meteorite struck at roughly 15 kilometers per second. That is a hypervelocity impact, an event so violent that air, stone, heat, and force all changed in an instant. The desert still carries the shape of it. It is the memory attached to the place. In 1999, elder Jack Pettigrew recorded a Djaru evening star tradition describing heat, explosion, flash, and dust. The same sequence modern impact physics would expect from such an event. So the first question is waiting at the edge of the crater. How much did people remember? And for how long? If this is the kind of mystery you want more of, subscribe now, because Black Mountain is where the ground itself starts answering before any witness speaks. To understand why Black Mountain has lasted so long in the Australian imagination, you have to stop looking at it like a peak and start looking at it like a broken machine. A normal mountain gives you surfaces, ridgelines, slopes, a way up and usually a way back down. Kalkajaka gives you edges, it gives you gaps, it gives you black stone piled at angles that make the eye lose track of depth, so that a crack 2 fingers wide can sit beside an opening large enough to take a person out of sight. Stand at the safe lookout and the whole thing seems still, almost silent. But the silence is misleading. Under the sun, the granite expands. At night, it cools. Tiny shifts pass through the pile with small knocks and hollow clicks, the kind of sound that makes people turn their head before they know why. The darkness of the mountain is often the first thing people notice, but that color has led many people toward the wrong question. The boulders themselves are granite. The black surface comes from growth across the rock, from lichen and algae that have settled there over long periods and stained the outside into that severe charcoal look. So when someone sees the mountain from the road and says it looks burnt or unnatural or dead, they are reacting to a surface effect. The real structure is stranger. Granite formed deep below ground, then the softer material around it wore away over enormous stretches of time. What remained was exposed, fractured, and left as a steep mass of separate blocks. Some are the size of rooms, some lean against others with no visible support except their own weight. Between them are vertical slots, tilted tunnels and pockets of air that can run down farther than anyone standing above would guess. It is a practical admission. Rescue teams can deal with cliffs, rivers, caves, heat, scrub, and bad weather. They can lower ropes, they can bring radios, lights, helmets, stretchers, but on Black Mountain, a rescuer may be looking at a hole that cannot be widened, a space that cannot be entered, and a trapped person who cannot be reached without disturbing the boulders that form the walls around them. If one block shifts, it does not behave like a door opening. It behaves like a loaded trap giving way. The weight above decides what happens next, and the mountain gives very little warning. Imagine the search problem for a moment. A person leaves the road, moves onto the lower rocks, and disappears from view behind a rise of dark granite. There may be no clean footprint trail because there is almost no soil. A dog may lose the scent because the air moves through the cracks in confusing ways, rising warm from one opening and sinking cool into another. A voice might travel down through the spaces, then come back changed, or not come back at all. A torch beam can hit one surface and leave the deeper hole beside it completely black. Even if searchers know the missing person is somewhere inside that stone mass, knowing and reaching are two different things. And on Kalkajaka, that difference is the danger. This is where a lot of mystery stories take a hard turn into the paranormal, and you can see why. A dark mountain, a forbidden surface, sounds from inside the rocks. People warned away from it. Reports over time of those who went too close and were not easily recovered. The ingredients almost arrange themselves, but the first honest answer is already in front of us. The mountain is built in a way that can hide evidence. It can remove sightlines. It can break normal search methods. It can make a person a few meters away become unreachable. That does not drain the fear from the place. If anything, it sharpens it, because the explanation does not make the hazard smaller. It makes it more exact. The physical details also explain why the mountain feels wrong, even before anyone tells you a story about it. Most landscapes give the body signals it can read. Sand shifts underfoot, mud records pressure, grass bends, a slope shows where water runs. Black Mountain denies those normal clues. The boulders are hard, dark, and dry. The air around them can feel hotter than the surrounding bush, with a mineral smell rising from warmed stone and dead leaves caught in crevices. Birds call from the trees around the base, but the rock pile itself can seem oddly empty. There are plants in some cracks, yes, but not enough to soften the shape. The place looks exposed and sealed at the same time, wide open to the sky and closed underneath. That contradiction is part of why Australia's mysterious places scientists cannot fully explain keep pulling people in. The best evidence often starts with something measurable. Rock type, temperature, distance, impact force. Then the human layer arrives. Fear, memory, warnings. A story told beside a road or in a family or by someone who knows the country well enough to say, do not treat that place like a playground. With Kalkajaka, modern science can describe the granite, the weathering, the biological crust, and the rescue risk. It can explain why a fall into the wrong void might leave almost no trace from above. What it cannot measure as neatly is the older boundary around the place, the one held by traditional owners long before a visitor centre or a national park sign existed. That is the next layer. Because if the mountain were only dangerous in a modern engineering sense, the story would end with a warning sign and a locked gate. But Kalkajaka was already set apart before European maps gave outsiders a name to print. The people of that country did not need a search report to understand that this stone mass asked for distance. They had their own accounts, their own law, and their own reasons for refusing to enter. And when you place those older warnings beside the geology, something uncomfortable happens. Two completely different ways of knowing the land begin pointing at the same dark pile of rock. That older boundary changes the mood around Kalkajaka, because it means the mountain was never an empty place waiting for outsiders to explain it. It already sat inside a living map of meaning. The Kuku-Yalanji people knew that country through movement, story, obligation, and warning. The mountain's traditional name is often translated as Place of the Spear, and even before you add any later legend to it, that name carries weight. A spear is not a soft image. It is pointed, it is held with care. It tells you that this is a place where approach matters. Around the mountain, the air feels different because the land changes so suddenly. Green scrub and open road give way to that dark heap of stone, and the contrast can make the eye hesitate. In the heat, the rock gives off a dry mineral smell. The bush insects keep working in the background, but the center of the formation seems to absorb attention. It is easy to understand why a visitor might describe the feeling as fear. Yet for traditional owners, the response is deeper than a visitor's shiver. Kalkajaka belongs to a system of knowledge that decides who may go, where, what should be avoided, and how dangerous places are spoken about. Accounts connected with the mountain describe ancestral conflict and a landscape marked by serious events. In some versions, the place is associated with a battle. In others, great beings and thrown stones explain the piled granite. A listener from outside that culture might be tempted to reduce those accounts to colorful explanations for a strange landform. That would miss the point. These stories are not museum labels pasted onto rocks. They are part of how country is remembered and respected. They hold relationships between people, place, danger, and law. They also carry a practical force. This is not a place for casual entry. This is where Australia's mysterious places scientists cannot fully explain become more complicated than ordinary unsolved mystery lists. Modern geology can tell you how granite forms and how erosion exposes it. Park management can tell you why loose boulders and hidden chambers make climbing too risky. But an oral tradition can hold the social and spiritual meaning of that risk across generations, long before anyone measures the gaps or writes a hazard report. Those are different forms of evidence. They do different work. Put beside each other, they make the mountain harder to dismiss and harder to sensationalize. There is a small trap here for modern audiences. We often want old stories to do one of two things. Either we want them to be magic, proving that the land is haunted, or we want them to be simple mistakes made before science arrived. Kalkajaka resists both readings. The traditional warnings do not need to be turned into a ghost story to be powerful. They also do not vanish. Just because geology can explain the danger. If a community has avoided a place for reasons held in law and memory, and the land itself turns out to be physically treacherous in a very specific way, that overlap deserves attention. Listen to the sound of that overlap. A modern sign says, "Do not climb because rescue may be impossible." An older boundary says, "Do not enter because this place carries danger and meaning." One is written for tourists in a national park. The other belongs to country and the people responsible for it. It is a warning heard twice. That matters because the later archive around Black Mountain is messy. Once colonial settlement reached the wider region, outsiders began collecting stories in a different way. A strange place became a place for rumors. A difficult search became a disappearance. A disappearance became a curse in the telling. Newspapers, travelers, police notes, local gossip, and campfire retellings all began to press against the same dark landmark. Over time, the mountain's actual hazards mixed with the human hunger for a more dramatic explanation. The smell of ink and dust enters the story here. Imagine the old records, clipped reports, changed spellings, missing context, place names written by people who did not fully know the country they were naming. A person goes missing somewhere near rough terrain. A stock animal wanders, a prospector's route is uncertain. A later storyteller remembers the mountain because the mountain is the most frightening feature in the district, and slowly, the uncertain event drifts toward it. It means the archive has to be handled like the rocks themselves, carefully, because one loose piece can shift the shape of everything around it. This is the part of the mystery that is less flashy, but more important. A place can be dangerous in reality and exaggerated in memory at the same time. It can have verified risk and inflated legend. It can be sacred, hazardous, misunderstood, and marketed all at once. Black Mountain sits at that crossing point. The stone gives the fear a physical base. The older knowledge gives the place a boundary. The later stories give it a public reputation. And once those layers settle together, separating them becomes difficult. So, when someone asks whether Kalkajaka is haunted, the better first question is, haunted by what kind of evidence? By geology? By warning? By bad searches in country that does not give up what it takes? By stories repeated until the sharp edges blur? The answer depends on which layer you are standing in, and standing is exactly the problem, because on that mountain, a person can be only a few steps from safety and still be beyond reach. The next layer begins when outsiders start writing the mountain down. That is when names, dates, missing travelers, and frightened witnesses enter the record. Some of those accounts point back to real danger. Some may have grown in the telling. And one pattern appears again and again in places like this. The more difficult the land is to search, the easier it becomes for rumor to move in after the searchers leave. Once outsiders began writing Black Mountain into their own records, the place changed again. It was still the same dark pile of granite near Cooktown, still the same dangerous formation known to traditional owners, but now it entered another kind of memory. Newspaper columns, police notes, traveler gossip, and the kind of local history that gets repeated in pubs until nobody is quite sure where the first version came from. Here, the archive becomes slippery. You can almost hear the paper when you read those old accounts. Dry pages, ink fading brown, a place name spelled one way in one clipping and another way in the next. A missing person said to be near the mountain, though near could mean close enough to touch the lower rocks, or simply somewhere in the wider district. A search described as thorough, even though the terrain itself made thoroughness a hope more than a fact. The language is confident. The evidence underneath it is often thinner. That does not mean nothing happened there. Dangerous country produces real incidents. Remote country delays help. Heat makes poor decisions worse. Scrub hides tracks. Granite leaves almost nothing to read once a person moves from soil to stone. Around Kalkajaka, all of that is true at once. But as stories passed from one mouth to another, the mountain began acting like a magnet. If something strange happened in the region, the darkest landmark nearby was an easy place to attach it. A traveler vanishes. Later, the story is told with the mountain closer. A stock animal disappears. In the next telling, it is swallowed by the rocks. A search fails. Failure becomes proof of something more than difficult ground. The human mind dislikes empty endings. It wants a shape, a cause, a force. Black Mountain gave people a shape they could point at. And look, you can understand why. Stand on the road with the sun dropping low, and the rock mass seems to darken before the trees do. The boulders hold their outline after the surrounding bush has softened into shadow. The wind catches in the gaps and comes out unevenly, sometimes as a low breath, sometimes as a hollow murmur. If you arrive already knowing the stories, your body starts listening for them. A loose stone settling somewhere inside the formation becomes a footstep. A bird shifting above you becomes a thrown pebble. Silence becomes attention. That is how reputation works in places like this. It grows around a core. The core here is hard granite, hidden voids, cultural warning, search difficulty, and a setting that punishes carelessness. Around that core, the retellings gather. Some are probably based on real loss, some may be mistaken. Some may have absorbed details from events that happened elsewhere. The mountain's legend did not need one perfect case to survive. It needed repetition, and the land supplied just enough danger to keep repetition believable. Modern checking has made that clearer. When researchers and local historians look back through the popular Black Mountain claims, they often find the same problems that appear in other famous mystery locations. Names shift, dates drift. A story printed decades after the event gains details that earlier versions do not have. A vague disappearance becomes a direct encounter with the rocks. A frightening but ordinary risk becomes dressed in the clothes of the unexplained. None of this proves the mountain is safe. It proves the story around it has been doing what stories do, moving, changing, sharpening. That skeptical turn is important because it keeps the mystery honest. If every rumor is accepted whole, the place becomes cartoonish. If every rumor is thrown out, the land itself gets ignored. The better reading sits in between. Black Mountain is dangerous enough to create unresolved cases and famous enough to attract extra ones. Its real physics make its folklore stronger. Its folklore makes people look again at its physics. Think about what a searcher is actually facing there. No neat grid. No soft ground taking footprints, no easy line of sight. A person could be below the surface and still close enough that a rescuer might walk past without knowing. The smell of hot stone and dry leaves would be the same. The flies would still move in the sun. The radio might crackle. Someone might call a name into the rocks and hear nothing useful come back. That kind of failure leaves a mark on a community. It leaves room for rumors to breathe. And then there are the reports that do not involve anyone entering the stones at all. People have spoken of unease, odd sounds, a reluctance to go near the formation, a sense that the mountain is watching. Those claims are impossible to measure cleanly, but the environment gives them a base. Dark rock beside green country, heat shimmering above bare stone, cavities that can turn wind into voice-like noise. A known history of warnings and disappearances pressing on the imagination before a visitor even arrives. The mind does not experience a landscape in isolation. It brings the whole file with it. So, by the time Black Mountain becomes known outside the region as one of Australia's mysterious places scientists cannot fully explain, the real question is no longer, is it paranormal? That question is too small. The better question is, how did a physical hazard, an aboriginal boundary, and a colonial rumour machine lock together so tightly that the mountain became almost impossible to discuss plainly? The answer begins to show us the pattern for the whole journey. Each place in this story has a measurable body: stone, air, impact. Each place also has witnesses, memory, and interpretation layered over it. At Kalkajaka, the body is granite and emptiness. The witnesses are searchers, visitors, traditional owners, and storytellers. The interpretation shifts depending on who is speaking. That is why the next case feels so different. Black Mountain waits in one place. It does not have to move, it lets people come to it, but far inland, near Boulia, the mystery refuses to stay fixed. It appears on open roads and station tracks. It enters side mirrors. It keeps pace with travelers who are already trying to leave. And unlike a mountain, a light can make you wonder whether the distance between you and it is changing, or whether something out there is choosing to follow. The shift from stone to light changes everything, because near Boulia, the land does not give you a single object to examine. There is no dark mass to fence off, no crater rim to measure, no pile of granite you can point a camera at in daylight and say, "There." That is the source. The Min light belongs to distance. It belongs to night roads, flat horizons, and the uneasy feeling that something visible can remain completely out of reach. Boulia sits in country where space behaves differently from the coast. The roads run long and thin across open ground. During the day, heat trembles above the surface and turns the far distance watery. At night, the air can feel suddenly emptied out, as if the whole plain has gone quiet to listen. A vehicle becomes a small moving room of engine hum, dashboard glow, dust smell, and headlight beam. Outside that beam, the land is almost featureless. Then, in some accounts, a light appears. The oldest recorded reports reach back at least to the 1890s, which matters. That places the phenomenon deep enough in the record that it cannot be brushed away as a recent tourist invention. The details shift from witness to witness, but the shape of the story keeps returning. A glow appears low on the horizon or off to one side. It may look white, yellow, or sometimes carry another tint. It does not behave quite like a farmhouse lamp or a campfire or an ordinary vehicle light. It seems to hold position with the traveler. It paces. Then, when attention sharpens, when someone slows down, turns toward it, or tries to make sense of it, it vanishes. If you have ever driven a remote road at night, you know why that detail gets under the skin. Your eyes measure distance by habit. A light ahead should either grow closer or fall behind. It should reveal a source, a truck, a gate, a property, a tower, another human presence. The Min refuses that comfort in the stories. It appears to move with the observer. That is why so many accounts use language that sounds almost personal. It followed us. It came alongside. It stayed with the car. Those phrases tell you what the experience felt like inside the witness's body. And the body matters in a place like this. The smell of dust gets into the cabin vents. The tires make a low, constant hiss on the road surface. The black outside the windows presses close, then opens wide again when the headlights catch a signpost or a pale strip of grass. A distant animal's eyes can flash and disappear. A reflector can flare bright enough to startle you. Your own headlights can bounce off dust behind you and make a false glow in a mirror. The outback at night is full of tricks, some ordinary, some atmospheric, and some that are hard to classify after the fact. The Min is one of the most useful cases in this whole catalogue. It sits right on the line between witness history and physical explanation. Treat every sighting as supernatural, and you ignore the way light can bend, scatter, reflect and mislead in open country. Dismiss every witness, and you ignore more than a century of people describing a pattern they found strange enough to remember. The honest path is narrower. It asks what kind of world can make a light seem to keep pace with a moving person. Local identity has grown around the phenomenon, of course. That happens when a mystery lasts long enough. A strange light becomes a sign on the road, a story told to visitors, a reason for people passing through to ask questions at the counter. But tourism did not create the older accounts. It inherited them. By the time the name became famous, the region already had a history of sightings, retellings, arguments and warnings passed between drivers, station workers, families and travelers who found themselves alone with too much dark around them. The name itself is tied to an old settlement story, but the phenomenon is broader than any one building or one ruin. This matters because a single haunted site explanation would be too easy. If the light belonged only to one graveyard, one hotel, one tragic corner of one road, then the mystery would shrink into local ghost lore. Instead, reports spread across open country where the main shared features are distance, flat ground, night travel, and sudden changes in air temperature. The land is doing something here. At the very least, it is setting the stage. Still, the witness descriptions keep one uncomfortable piece alive. Many people do not merely say they saw an unexplained glow. They say it behaved in relation to them. A camplight does not care whether you speed up. A star does not retreat when approached. A truck on another road may seem to track with you for a while, but eventually geometry gives it away. The Min Min, in its strongest accounts, does not give itself away that cleanly. It stays just convincing enough to make a rational person keep looking and just strange enough that looking does not solve it. But you can hear the difference in the way these stories are told. A misidentified headlight becomes a quick anecdote once someone works it out. The Min Min stories linger. People remember where they were sitting in the vehicle. They remember who spoke first. They remember the silence after the light disappeared. Some laugh when they tell it later, because laughter is a way of stepping back from fear. Others keep the tone flat, almost careful, as if too much drama would make the account sound less true. And before modern headlights filled the roads, before electric lamps and reflective signs gave the night so many ordinary sources to confuse, similar lights were already part of Aboriginal knowledge across parts of the wider region. That does not make the phenomenon simple. It makes it older and harder to reduce. Different communities understood such lights through their own frameworks, connected to country, spirit, warning, or presence. Those meanings should not be stripped away just because a later scientific theory can explain some sightings. They belong to the human record of the place. So the Min Min sits there, glowing between two kinds of evidence. On one side, witness accounts going back more than a century. On the other, a landscape almost designed to bend perception. Flat, vast, dark, and ruled by air that changes after sunset. The eerie reading says, "The light follows travelers." The scientific question asks whether the atmosphere can make a distant source seem to do exactly that. Here, a university professor enters the story as someone willing to chase the light into physics. In 2003, he proposed an answer that sounds almost as strange as the sightings themselves. The road may be empty, the source may be far beyond the horizon, and the thing following you may be made by the air between. Professor Jack Pettigrew's idea matters because it took the Min Min light out of the easy pile of ghost stories and placed it in the harder world of optics. In 2003, the University of Queensland professor proposed that many sightings could be explained by a Fata Morgana, a complex mirage formed when layers of air bend light across long distances. It sounds delicate, almost harmless, but on a flat road near Boulia, in the dark, that bending can turn an ordinary source into something that feels impossible. Picture the country after sunset. The ground has spent the day soaking up heat. Then the upper air cools at a different rate. Layers form, one sitting over another, each with its own temperature and density. Light passing through those layers does not always travel in the straight, obedient line we expect. It can curve, it can lift an image from beyond the horizon. It can smear a point of light until it looks soft-edged and hovering. A lamp that should be hidden by distance may appear ahead of you. A vehicle on another road may seem to float where no road exists. The air itself becomes a hidden piece of glass. That part people often miss. It is real light taking a strange path. If you see it, you are seeing something physical, even if the source is not where your eyes tell you it is. That makes Pettigrew's theory powerful. It respects the witnesses more than a lazy dismissal would. They may have seen a light. They may have watched it hold position. They may have had every reason to be unsettled. The trick may have been in the atmosphere between them and the source. The Channel Country gives the theory room to work. Long sightlines, low horizons, Sparse settlement, big day-to-night temperature changes, roads that run across open ground for distances that make the human eye lose its usual anchors. In a city, a strange light is quickly surrounded by other clues. Buildings, street lamps, traffic, reflections in glass. Near Boulia, a single glow can stand alone against a black plain. There is nothing beside it to measure it against. No wall, no tree line close enough to help. Only darkness, engine noise, and the small nervous calculations your brain makes while you drive. That helps explain why the Min can seem to pace a traveler. If the source is far away and the refracted image is being produced by a layer of air over a broad distance, your movement may not change the apparent position in the way you expect. Drive faster, and the light may still appear to hold with you. Turn slightly, and it may slide or shift. Stop, and it may hang there trembling. Then, when the air layer changes, or the line between source, atmosphere, and observer breaks, it is gone. That vanishing is one of the eeriest parts of the reports, and it fits the physics better than people might think. A mirage does not have to fade politely. If the angle fails, the image can drop out suddenly. The witness does not see the source drive away or burn out. The witness sees presence become absence. One moment the glow is there, the next moment the road is only road again. Still, the theory has limits. It explains a class of sightings very well, especially distant, soft lights with no clear source. It fits the land and the air. It gives a serious reason why something beyond the horizon could appear close. But the strongest Min accounts often include a detail that refuses to settle down. The light appears to react. People say it retreats when approached. They say it comes closer after they stop chasing it. They say it moves beside them, not ahead of them, and keeps a kind of unnerving company. A passive optical effect should not care what a person wants. It has no awareness, no intention, no ability to decide. So when a witness describes the light as if it is playing with distance, we have to be careful. Part of that feeling may come from the witness's movement changing the viewing angle. Part may come from the brain trying to turn a confusing light into a behavior. Part may come from later retelling, where uncertainty becomes a cleaner story. But some accounts remain stubborn. They are too consistent in tone to ignore and too hard to test after the moment has passed. Here is the honest tension at the center of the Min. It may be the best explanation for many reports, but many is not the same as all, and a catalogue like this has to keep that difference alive. Otherwise, we would be replacing one lazy answer with another. The paranormal version says the light follows because it wants to. The lazy, skeptical version says everyone was confused. The evidence-led version asks which sightings fit the air, which fit ordinary lights, which fit memory, and which remain open because the conditions were never measured at the time. There is also the older knowledge to hold beside the modern optics. Aboriginal accounts of strange lights in parts of this wider region cannot be folded neatly into a headlight theory. Some may still involve distant fires or natural light effects. Some may belong to cultural meanings that are not ours to flatten into a laboratory sentence. What matters here is that the landscape has been producing reports of unusual lights for a long time, across more than one way of understanding the world. Pettigrew's work gives us a mechanism. It does not erase the record that came before him. So, near Boulia, the Min remains suspended between air and story. It can be modelled partly, it can be explained partly, it can be laughed off by people who have never sat alone in that dark, and defended fiercely by people who have. The atmosphere may bend the light, but the experience bends the witness. Here is where the journey turns west, because the next place does not depend on a witness glancing into a mirror or a driver trying to judge distance at night. The next place is a wound you can stand inside. It is measured in hundreds of meters, carved by a force from space, and known in Djaru country by a name older than the scientific report. When the Min Min disappears, the road goes dark. At Wolfe Creek, the evidence never left. From the fading road light near Boulia, the story turns toward a place where the evidence is too large to mistake for a rumor. Wolfe Creek Crater, known to Djaru people as Kandimalal, sits out in the dry country on the edge of the great sandy desert, where the land can look flat enough to go on forever. Then, the circle appears. Not a hill, not a lake bed, a vast, rounded wound in the earth, about 875 to 950 meters across, with a rim that rises from the plain like the lip of something struck from above. The first feeling there is scale. The air is hot and still. Dust clings to shoes. Spinifex scratches at the lower legs. The colors are simple and severe. Pale sky, red-brown ground, washed stone, hard shadow. From the rim, the crater floor drops away in a way that makes the body understand before the mind catches up. Something violent happened here. The question is no longer whether the place is real or whether witnesses saw something correctly. The shape itself is the witness. Modern science gives that shape a brutal explanation. A 14,000-ton iron meteorite came in at roughly 15 kilometers per second. At that speed, the object was not falling in any ordinary sense. It was arriving with cosmic force, crossing the sky faster than anything human bodies are built to imagine. When it struck, the energy released in that instant was enough to carve the circular depression, break and transform rock, and leave behind a scar that wind and sand have softened but not erased. Hypervelocity. Impact sounds clean in a laboratory voice. On the ground, it means heat, pressure, shock, flying debris, dust rising, sound arriving like the sky itself had split open. Much of it would have been destroyed by the violence of its own arrival, changed by speed and heat at the moment of contact. The crater is what remains after the event spent itself into the land. For a long time, outsiders did not classify Kandimalal through that physical story. Scientific recognition came only after the crater was noticed from the air in the 20th century, when survey work made its near-perfect circle hard to ignore. That timing matters. It means the wider scientific world arrived late. The crater was already in country. It already had a name. It already belonged to a network of memory, law, and story before anyone brought impact models, field notes, or measuring equipment to its edge. This is where the pattern from Black Mountain and the Min Min light begins to change. At Kalkajaka, traditional warning and geological danger point toward the same dark formation. Near Boulia, old accounts and modern optics overlap without closing every gap. At Kandimalal, the stone record and cultural memory face each other more directly. One is written in broken rock and circular form. The other is carried in Djaru knowledge connected to the place. The most important thing is to treat that knowledge carefully. It is easy for outsiders to flatten an Aboriginal account into a headline. Ancient story predicts science. That sounds exciting, but it can be careless. These traditions are not puzzles left behind for modern researchers to solve. They are part of living culture. They carry meaning that belongs to the people and country they come from. Still, when a recorded account describes the physical sequence of an impact with unusual closeness, it deserves attention in its own right. The crater also forces a different kind of humility. With the Min Min, the scientific question asks how air can trick the eye. With Black Mountain, it asks how terrain can defeat rescue and record keeping. Here, science can explain the mechanism with confidence. Iron meteorite, tremendous speed, impact, excavation. The unresolved part moves into human time. How long can a community remember an event? How accurately can spoken knowledge hold the pattern of something terrifying? What happens when a story preserved through generations meets a landscape that still carries the mark? Stand on the rim, and that question does not feel abstract. The wind moves over the opening with a dry hiss. Small stones shift underfoot. The crater floor below looks quiet now, almost calm, but the calm is misleading because the circle is the frozen aftermath of speed. Every meter across it is part of a measurement, and every measurement points back to a moment no person could have ignored if people were close enough to see or hear it. Australia's most unexplained places seen through deep time are not all unexplained in the same way. One may be physically dangerous and historically exaggerated. One may be partly solved by atmosphere and partly left in witness memory. One may be scientifically clear in its cause, yet astonishing in what human memory appears to have preserved. The mystery shifts shape from place to place. It does not disappear just because instruments enter the story. At Kandamalal, the instrument tells us what came down. The crater tells us where it struck. The measurements tell us the size of the violence. But the Djaru account, recorded from Elder Jack Pettigrew in 1999, brings in another layer. And this is the part that makes the whole case feel different. It does not merely say that something unusual happened in the sky. It describes heat. It describes an explosion. It describes a flash. It describes dust. Those are not vague decorations. They are the same physical signs modern impact science would expect from a cosmic collision of this kind. And if that sequence was carried through oral tradition before researchers wrote it down, then the crater is not the only thing that survived in the desert. Something of the event may have survived in words as well, and that raises a question even harder than the impact itself. The question sits over Kandamalal because the crater is more than a geological feature once the Djaru account enters the frame. The stone gives one kind of record, the spoken story gives another. And when Elder Jack Pettigrew recorded the Evening Star tradition in 1999, the sequence he gave was not a vague tale of something strange in the sky. It had movement, it had heat, it had a violent arrival, it had the flash and dust you would expect if a body from space struck the Earth with terrible speed. In the account, the evening star is connected to a moment of danger and force. A light in the sky becomes too hot, falls and hits the ground. Then comes the explosion, then the brightness, then the dust rising after impact. You do not need to force that into modern language for it to feel close to the physics. A large iron meteorite entering at enormous speed would compress the air ahead of it, burn, strike, and release energy in a burst so fast that the land itself would become part of the blast. Rock would fracture, dust would lift, sound would carry across open country in a way nobody nearby would mistake for ordinary thunder. Now, there is a careful line to walk here. Reading every detail of a traditional account like a science textbook would be disrespectful in its own way because it strips the story out of its cultural setting and turns it into a laboratory note. Kandamalal asks for a more serious kind of listening. The account belongs to Djaru knowledge. The impact belongs to the land. The overlap is real enough to make researchers pay attention. Stand again at the rim and imagine what the story is carrying. Heat, because an object arriving from space does not drift gently down. Explosion, because the impact releases its force in an instant. Flash, because the energy is visible as well as physical. Dust, Because the ground does not stay still when it is struck that hard. Each element is simple. Together, they form a chain. And that chain is why this case feels different from a normal legend attached to a strange place. The crater's modern measurements make the chain even heavier, a width in the range of 875 to 950 meters. A meteorite mass estimated around 14,000 tons, a speed of roughly 15 kilometers per second. Those numbers are clean when spoken in a documentary voice, but the event behind them is almost impossible to hold in the mind. At that speed, distance collapses. The object is there, then it is here, and the ground is changed before anything living nearby could understand what was happening. Here, the deep time frame becomes unsettling. The crater itself may be far older than any direct human witness could reasonably be assumed without careful dating and evidence, and researchers continue to treat the relationship between story and event with caution. But the Djaru tradition does not need to be handled as a simple eyewitness transcript to matter. It may preserve a memory of the crater's origin or a later interpretation formed from observing the landform and sky together, or a cultural explanation that aligns with impact physics in a way too striking to ignore. Every possibility still tells us something important. People read country closely, and they kept that reading alive. It is a different kind of evidence from a rock sample, but it is not empty. It has rules, it has custodians, it has places where it belongs, and people with the right to speak for it. Modern outsiders often arrive with instruments and assume that measurement is the first serious act of knowing. Kandamalal quietly argues against that pride. The measuring came late. The place was already named, storied, and held within a system of meaning. You can feel why the crater would demand story. It is too round to ignore, too sudden in the landscape, too large to be explained by a small accident. In the middle of dry country, where every rise and channel has practical meaning, this circular depression would call attention to itself generation after generation. People traveling through that country would know its rim, its floor, the way rain behaves there, the way sound sits inside it, the way the sun cuts shadow across one side before evening. The place would not fade into background. It would keep asking to be accounted for. And the account that survives does something very rare. It connects the sky to the ground with a sequence modern science recognizes. It does prove that the boundary between story and observation is not as simple as many people were taught. In places like this, story can hold careful attention. It can carry warning, law, memory, and physical description together without separating them into modern categories. Sometimes they are about gaps in respect. Black Mountain was treated by outsiders as a site of eerie disappearances before enough attention was given to the older boundary and the very real danger of its stone. The Min Min light was treated as either ghostly or foolish before atmospheric science offered a serious middle ground. Wolfe Creek forces the strongest reversal of all. Modern science does not arrive to rescue an ignorant past. It arrives to find that the place already had an explanation, held in a different form. Still, the scientific side of Kandamalal has its own unfinished edge. Measurements can tell us the width, the impact force, the likely nature of the object, and the violence of the collision. They can compare the crater to other impact structures, study weathering, look for fragments, and model the energy released. But measurement alone cannot tell us how a story moves through families, ceremonies, country, and time. It cannot easily say why some details survive while others fall away. It cannot put a number on the discipline required to keep knowledge alive without paper, so the crater leaves us with two records facing each other in the heat, one made by iron and speed, the other carried by people. Neither one is casual, Neither one is weightless. And if Kandamalal shows that a falling star can leave a mark in both land and language, then the final question becomes much larger than one crater. How many other places across Australia have been waiting for science to catch up with knowledge that was already there? The larger question sends the story outward, because Kandamalal is not an isolated reminder that country can hold knowledge longer than paper can. Across Australia, impact sites, strange lights, dangerous stone country, and old warnings sit beside each other in ways that make a simple timeline feel too thin. The archive says one thing, the land says another, then traditional knowledge adds a third voice, older in some places than the maps and reports people still treat as the beginning. Here, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. At Black Mountain, the official language is risk, hidden voids, unstable granite, no safe rescue path. The older warning around Kalkajaka speaks from a different system, but it also tells people to keep distance. Near Boulia, the Min Min light has a scientific pathway through mirage and air. Yet the witness record reaches back far enough and spreads widely enough that one explanation cannot swallow every account whole. At Wolfe Creek, the physical cause is clear, but the Djaru evening star tradition recorded from Jack Pettigrew gives the crater a second record, one carried in words. Those three cases do not prove the same thing. That is important. If they are forced into one neat answer, the story becomes weaker. Black Mountain is mostly about terrain that can hide a person and a reputation that grew around that danger. The Min Min is about light, distance, air, and the unreliable but persistent experience of witnesses. Kandamalal is about a cosmic impact and a cultural account whose physical details line up in a way that deserves serious respect. Three places, three kinds of mystery, three different relationships between science and memory. And yet they share a pressure. Each one makes outsiders slow down. You cannot rush across the boulders at Kalkajaka and expect the land to forgive you. You cannot chase a light across the open country near Boulia and be sure the distance you see is the distance that exists. You cannot stand at the rim of Wolfe Creek and pretend scientific naming was the first act of understanding there. The ground, the air, and the crater all resist that kind of confidence. There is also a deeper issue hiding inside the word unexplained. People often use it as if it means nobody knows anything, but that is rarely true. A place can be unexplained to one system and deeply known to another. It can be measured by geologists and still held by traditional owners in ways measurement does not replace. It can be partly solved by physics and still leave witness behavior that does not fit cleanly. It can be famous for the wrong reason and still dangerous for the right one. The skeptical path has to stay careful. A lazy mystery channel would turn Kalkajaka into a hungry mountain, the Min Min into a spirit with headlights, and Kandamalal into proof that ancient people saw the impossible in some theatrical way. That would get attention, but it would flatten the most interesting part. A lazy debunking channel would go the other direction. Dangerous rocks, optical mirage, meteor crater, case closed. That would also miss the point. The real story lives in the overlap, where explanation works, but does not own everything. Listen to how each place changes the role of the scientist. At Black Mountain, science and rescue knowledge explain why the terrain defeats ordinary recovery. The mystery shrinks from supernatural claim to physical hazard, but the place remains frightening. At Boulia, Professor Pettigrew's Fata Morgana theory gives the Min Min its strongest modern explanation. Yet the best version of that theory still has to sort sightings into categories rather than erase them all at once. At Kandimalal, impact science confirms the violence written into the land, while the Djaru account makes the scientific arrival feel late rather than final. The reversal matters. For a long time, colonial records were treated as the serious record, and Aboriginal accounts as background colour. These places make that habit look careless. Oral tradition is not a single thing, and it should not be handled like a loose collection of campfire tales. It can include law, navigation, environmental memory, warning, history, and sacred meaning. Some parts are not for outsiders. Some parts are place-specific. Some parts can line up with physical evidence in ways that force researchers to listen with more humility. At the same time, respect does not require pretending every eerie account is automatically factual in a modern scientific sense. That would be another kind of disrespect, because it would use traditional knowledge as decoration for someone else's fantasy. The stronger position is more demanding. It asks what each claim is, who has authority to speak for it, what the land itself shows, what records exist, what measurements can test, and where uncertainty should remain open. The thread runs through these places, a harder middle ground. Stone can be tested, air can be modelled, craters can be measured, witnesses can be mistaken and also sincere. Old stories can carry meanings that do not translate neatly, and also preserve observations that modern researchers should not ignore. If you hold all three cases together, the emotional shape changes. The fear at Black Mountain becomes less like a ghost story and more like the dread of a place that can hide consequences. The unease of the Min Min becomes less like a simple haunting and more like the discomfort of perception failing in a vast landscape. The awe at Kandimalal becomes less like surprise at an ancient coincidence and more like respect for a memory system outsiders underestimated. That brings the whole investigation to its final edge. We have one mountain where the ground can take away the evidence, one light where the air may create the witness, one crater where the land and the story seem to answer each other across time. The sharper question is whether some of its strangest places were never waiting to be solved at all, only waiting for science to arrive without assuming it was the first voice in the room. It is a journey across three different kinds of evidence, each one strong in its own way, each one incomplete if it stands alone. A mountain of dark granite near Cooktown, a travelling light near Boulia, a crater in Djaru country where the sky once came down with force enough to change the ground. At Kalkajaka, the answer begins with stone. The mountain is closed because its hidden spaces can turn a simple mistake into a search nobody can safely complete. That is the hard, physical reality. But the older boundary around the place gives that reality a deeper frame. Traditional owners understood long before outside visitors treated it as a mystery landmark, that this was not ordinary ground. The modern sign and the older warning do not speak in the same way, yet both point toward distance, care, and respect. Near Boulia, the Min Min light leaves a different kind of trace. No crater, no pile of rock, nothing you can fence off and photograph in daylight as the source. The evidence lives in repeated accounts, in dark roads, in witnesses who remember a glow that seemed to hold pace and then vanish. Professor Pettigrew's Fata Morgana explanation gives the phenomenon a serious scientific body. Light bent by layers of air, lifted from far beyond where the eye thinks the horizon ends. The answer is powerful. It explains the floating quality, the distance, the sudden disappearance, and many of the conditions around the sightings. But the best explanation still has edges. It cannot turn every report into a clean diagram. Some sightings may be ordinary lights, some may be mirage, some may be memory shaped by fear and distance, some remain too thinly recorded to judge. The mystery survives in the sorting. Out there, the dark plane makes even a rational explanation feel uneasy, because the air can show you something real and still mislead you about where it is. Then Kandimalal changes the emotional weight of the whole story. There, science does not struggle to prove the main event. The crater is the event's signature. The width, the iron meteorite, the tremendous speed, the circular scar in the desert floor, all of it points to impact. Yet the Djaru Evening Star tradition, recorded from Jack Pettigrew in 1999, gives the place another record. Heat, explosion, flash, dust. A sequence that matches the physics closely enough to make easy dismissal feel careless. It is the awe reveal at the heart of this journey. It was the way land, atmosphere, and memory can meet. At one place, the ground explains why people fear it. At another, the air may explain why a light appears to follow. At the crater, modern physics and a Djaru account stand close enough together that the old habit of treating oral tradition as background noise starts to look very small. None of this asks us to accept every eerie claim as fact. That would weaken the story. The stronger answer is more demanding. Check the records, respect the custodians, measure the rock, listen to the witnesses. Admit when a theory explains much of a case, and admit when it does not explain every part people report. This is why these places remain so compelling. Black Mountain is frightening because its danger is real enough to need no embellishment. The Min Min light is unsettling because the best physics still leaves the human experience trembling at the edge. Wolfe Creek is astonishing because a violent event from the sky may have left a mark in land and story at the same time. In the end, the three landscapes do not close like a locked case file. They remain open in a quieter, heavier way. At Cooktown, the dark stones keep their gaps. Near Boulia, the road still runs into night and distance. At Kandimalal, the crater rim still catches the last light while the floor below settles into shadow. It is a person at the edge of a place, stopping before the next step, because the land has already spoken in more than one voice. If you want more evidence-led mysteries from Australia's deep past and strange present, stay with the channel for the next one.